Hello, everybody. In the first episode, we talked about the life of Masturah Ardalan, her education, her marriage to Khosrow Khan, her poetry, her historical work, and the difficult final years of her life. But knowing her life story is not enough to understand Masturah. To really understand why she was so important, we need to enter the world of her writing and discover how she thought about love, loss, homeland, time, faith, and human life. One of the most interesting things about Mastura was her relationship with language. She wrote in Persian and Kurdish, and her multilingual background gave her different ways to express her thoughts and emotion. In her Persian writing, we often find more philosophical reflection, wisdom, and questions about human existence. In her Kurdish poetry, emotion, homeland, identity, and longing become especially powerful. For Mastura, language was not simply a way of communicating, it was a way of understanding herself and the world around her. And this becomes very clear when we look at her poetry. Mastura could take a very personal experience and turn it into something universal. When she wrote about love, she was not simply talking about the relationship between two people. Love could become a spiritual force. When she wrote about separation, she was not simply describing sadness. Separation became a way of thinking about human destiny and the fact that nothing in life lasts forever. And when she wrote about time, time itself almost became a living character. Sometimes time seems like an enemy that takes away the people we love. Sometimes it is like a teacher that gives us difficult lessons. And sometimes it seems like a powerful force that changes everything around us, whether we want it or not. Perhaps this was so important to Mastura because she had personally experienced the power of time. She experienced love, but also loss. She lived close to political power, but she also saw that power disappear. She knew the comfort of her homeland, but later experienced separation from it. She knew intellectual and cultural life at the Erdogan court, but she also experienced illness, exile, and the death of her husband. So when Mastura writes about the changing nature of life, she is not simply discussing a philosophical idea. She is writing about something she knew personally. But what is especially beautiful about her poetry is the way she transforms pain. Pain does not remain only pain. Separation can become a way of understanding ourselves. Longing can become a journey into memory. Suffering can lead to wisdom. This gives her poetry a strong spiritual quality. Mastura was influenced by religious and Sufi thought, and this spiritual dimension appears throughout her writing. Love can become a way of purifying the soul. Loss can become a moment of reflection. Human suffering can lead to a deeper understanding of life, destiny, and our relationship with God. There is sadness in Mastura's poetry, but there is also dignity. She does not present herself simply as a helpless woman suffering because life has treated her badly. Instead, we hear the voice of an intelligent and emotionally strong person trying to understand what suffering means. This is one of the reasons her voice as a woman is so interesting. Mastura did not need to repeatedly tell people that women were capable of intellectual achievement. She demonstrated it, she participated in intellectual discussions, she wrote poetry, she studied religion and philosophy, she communicated with important poets, and most importantly, she wrote history. Her achievement itself became her argument. There is also another important presence in Masturah's poetry: nature. Mountains, valleys, wind, water, rain, night, and dawn are not simply beautiful scenery in her poetry, they have meaning. The mountain can represent strength and dignity. The wind can become a messenger carrying memories across great distances. Water and springs can represent peace, healing, and purity. Night can become a symbol of loneliness, and dawn can represent hope. This connection with nature becomes especially powerful when Masturah writes about her homeland. Sena, the city of her birth, was much more than a geographical place for her. It represented childhood, memory, belonging, and identity. When she was separated from Sena, the city became even more powerful in her imagination. Sometimes you do not need to say, "I miss my homeland." A mountain can say it for you. An old road can say it. The wind, a familiar landscape, or the memory of a place from childhood can carry an entire world of emotion. And this is one of the beautiful qualities of Masturah's poetic imagination. The landscape of Kurdistan becomes part of her emotional world. The mountains outside become connected to the strength inside. The distance between places becomes the emotional distance of separation. Night becomes loneliness, and dawn becomes the possibility that darkness will eventually end. But Masturah was not only a poet. When she turned to history, we see another side of her mind. In the history of Ardalan, her writing becomes more systematic and analytical. She connects events with their causes and consequences. She considers political events, power, morality, and social change. But interestingly, the poet inside her does not completely disappear. History can sometimes become a collection of names and dates. One ruler dies, another comes to power, wars happen, governments change, and ordinary human beings disappear behind political events. Masturah brought a more human dimension to history. The rulers, soldiers, women, and other people she wrote about were not simply names. They were human beings living through change. This is why her historical writing is so important. She was interested not only in what happened, but also in what those events meant. And this brings us to perhaps one of the most important aspects of Masturah's legacy. She understood the importance of preserving memory. Political power does not last forever. Emirates rise and fall, rulers die, palaces change, borders change. But when someone records their story, part of the world can survive. Masturah lived through major changes herself. She saw the decline of the political world around her. She lost her husband, she left Sina and spent the final part of her life in Suleymania. But through writing, she helped preserve the memory of the world she had known. And perhaps this is why her work remains important today. Her legacy is not only about being a successful woman in the 19th century, it is also about the relationship between memory and identity. The history of a people is not only the history of governments, wars, and borders. It is also the history of language. It is poetry. It is memory. It is the stories that people tell about themselves. And this raises some important questions. Who writes history? Who preserves memory? And which voice are remembered? For a woman like Masturah to write history in the 19th century was therefore significant in more than one way. She was preserving the history of Ardalan, but she was also placing the voice of a woman inside that history. She was not simply an observer. She became one of the people recording and interpreting the story. This is why Masturah has become an important cultural symbol today, especially when we talk about Kurdish women and their role in literature, culture, and history. Her life reminds us that women were not simply standing outside Kurdish intellectual history, they were part of creating it. Masturah's work also shows us something very interesting about identity. She could be deeply connected to Kurdish culture and homeland, while also participating in the wider Persian literary tradition. She could be a religious thinker and a poet. She could write about political history and at the same time write deeply emotional poetry. She could love her husband without showing her own intellectual identity to disappear behind his. These different parts of her personality existed together. And perhaps this is why her work still feels human today. The world around Masturah has disappeared. The Ardalan Emirate belongs to history. The political figures she knew are gone. Much of the poetry attributed to her has unfortunately been lost. But the questions behind her writing are still familiar to us. What does it mean to lose someone we love? What happens when we are separated from our homeland? What does time take away from us? How do we preserve our identity when the world around us changes? How can writing protect memory from disappearing? Masturah found her answer through words. She preserved emotion through poetry. She preserved thought through her religious and philosophical writing. And she preserved history through the history of Ardalan. She died in Suleymania in 1848, but her voice did not disappear with her. More than a century and a half later, we are still talking about her. We are still reading about the world she knew. And we are still asking many of the same questions that appear in her writing. Perhaps this is the most important part of Masturah Ardalan's legacy. People die, political powers rise and fall, cities change, entire periods of history come to an end, but words can survive. And sometimes the person holding the pen can preserve something that political power cannot. Masturah Ardalan was a poet, a thinker, a historian, and a woman who lived ahead of many of the expectations of her time. But above all, she was a keeper of memory. And through her words, part of that memory is still alive today. Thank you for listening.